It was just another Monday morning when I felt the first stirrings of dread. The usual hum of the office, the click-clack of keyboards, the low murmur of distant conversations. It was all normal. But then came the email, an all-hands meeting called by the CEO. That was strange. I'd been with the company for 7 years, long enough to know that a Monday morning all-hands wasn't just for updates or a quick chat. Something big was coming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I grabbed my coffee and made my way to the conference room. The long wooden table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and my colleagues trickled in, exchanging glances. No one spoke much, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. I took my seat near the end of the table, pretending to concentrate on my phone while my mind raced through possibilities. Was it a new project? Was the company pivoting in a new direction? The CEO, Bruce, walked in, his presence commanding the room. He was a big man, tall, sharp jawline, with the type of power suit that made him look like he could close a deal before the handshake was even finished. He took his place at the front of the room, and the room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice cool, almost rehearsed. "I know you all were expecting something more exciting, but today I have a very important announcement to make." I straightened in my chair, my stomach twisting into tight knots. Bruce paused, looking around the room, his eyes settling on me for a split second. As of today, Mara Kellis will no longer be continuing in her role as Chief Design Engineer for the company. The words hit like a cold slap. A sharp sting of disbelief washed over me. I sat there for a moment, frozen. While the room buzzed with quiet murmurs, I hadn't expected this. The flagship autonomous shipping drones, the ones that had brought the company so much recognition, were my designs. My algorithms, my code, my sleepless nights spent tweaking every last detail. This was my legacy. The core of the company's success was built on my work. But Bruce didn't pause for a dramatic effect. His voice was detached, clinical as he continued. "Mara has been a valuable asset, but we feel it's time to go in a different direction." I could barely process the words. Valuable? This was how you treated someone who helped build your reputation. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement of the work I'd poured into the company for years. Just cold business. A folder was passed down the table, a severance packet. A lifeline for someone being cast aside like yesterday's news. I didn't take it. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulling out a simple white envelope. I placed it gently on the table, facing Bruce. "Before you call in my replacement, I suggest you take a look at what's inside." I didn't look at anyone else. The murmurs around me were louder now, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Bruce's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he didn't say anything. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm done," I said quietly, turning on my heel without looking back. The buzz of whispers followed me out of the room, and I didn't care. I was done being their backup plan, their token genius. I had a plan now, and it didn't include sitting at a table where they decided who gets to play. As I walked out of the building, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't just leaving my job. I was taking back control. The envelope I left behind contained a failsafe, a legal claim tied to a clause in the drone control software I had embedded months ago. If they thought they could discard me without consequence, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The door slammed shut behind me, and I took a deep breath as I stood on the sidewalk. The cool morning air hitting my face like a wake-up call. The last few hours had been a blur, but now that I was out of the building, I could finally think. For a split second, I wondered if I had gone too far. I hadn't said goodbye to anyone. I hadn't explained myself to the team I'd worked alongside for years. But as I glanced up at the company building, its sleek glass walls reflecting the gray sky above, it didn't matter anymore. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the secure dashboard I'd set up months ago, the one that only I had access to. My fingers hovered over the screen, and I couldn't suppress the brief smile that flickered across my face. With a few taps, I hit execute. Inside the envelope I left behind, Bruce would find a claim that tied back to the core of the company's most valuable technology, the drone control system, the heart of their operations. I'd embedded a hidden clause into the system's code months ago, knowing something like this might happen. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't just a warning. It was a failsafe, a line of defense against being erased, against them stealing my work. One by one, the control nodes for the entire autonomous fleet began to shut down. The first to go was the flight route forecasting AI, the one that predicted weather, adjusted delivery schedules, optimized air traffic, and allowed the drones to fly autonomously across the globe. It had taken years to fine-tune. Now, it was gone. Seconds later, the client portal went dark. The app that allowed customers to track their drone shipments, the backbone of the entire business, vanished into nothing. I didn't just lock them out. I triggered a cascade. Without my authentication, they couldn't access the central servers. Without me, they couldn't get the drones off the ground. I could almost hear the chaos that was about to unfold. I could picture the engineers in the building scrambling, frantically typing commands, but finding nothing but error messages. Bruce would be staring at a screen that couldn't even load a basic system file. His lawyers, sitting in that sterile conference room, would be staring at blank screens, wondering why the whole company had just ground to a halt, and none of them would be able to fix it without me. I wasn't just going to walk away without leaving my mark. I tapped a few more buttons on my phone. This wasn't just about control. It was about sending a message. My fingers hovered over the final line of code, the line that would shut down the global contracts dependent on the company's system. Government contracts, high-profile logistics deals, deals they couldn't afford to lose. I could hear the executives in their offices making calls, frantic calls. They wouldn't have the answers, not without me. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, my phone in my hand, watching as the damage unfolded. The hum of the city around me felt distant, like I was the only one awake in a world that had frozen. But the silence didn't last long. My phone buzzed. The first message was from an unknown number. It wasn't a typical text. It was more like a ping from a secure server, but it had an ominous feel to it. It was brief. "We are aware of your actions. You have one choice. Walk away." I stared at it for a moment, reading it again, then again. Who the hell would send something like this? It didn't feel like a company trying to buy me out. It felt something else. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. A call this time. It was an unfamiliar number, but something about it felt urgent. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" A calm male voice came through the line. "Mara Kellis, I suggest you take a step back. Your technology no longer belongs to you." I couldn't suppress the laugh that bubbled up, bitter and dry. "Oh, really? And who are you?" "My name is irrelevant. What matters is that you understand the situation you've put yourself in." His tone remained unnervingly calm. "You've drawn attention to yourself, and the consequences won't be kind." I leaned back against the concrete, the weight of his words settling into my gut. "So what, you think you can intimidate me into walking away? Not happening. You're too late. You're not in control anymore," he said, his words like a quiet threat. "PulseNet, the network you've built, the investors who control it, they'll make sure of that." I froze. PulseNet? That was the name they used internally for the full autonomous shipping network. The company had always kept it under wraps, but I knew it had been their plan for global logistics domination. I had built that network. I had coded its foundation. I was the architect. "I don't take threats lightly," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse quickened. "You don't scare me. You think I'm afraid of losing this battle? I've already won." "Think again," the voice replied smoothly. "We've been monitoring the situation from the start, and we'll be waiting for your next move." The line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone in my hand, the chill of the morning air pressing against my skin. I didn't know who had just called, but something in their tone suggested I wasn't fighting just one company anymore. This was bigger than I thought, and I had just set a trap. Now the question was, who was going to walk into it first? It had been a few months since I left the company, but the silence felt louder than any confrontation I'd ever had. The initial rush of taking back control, of walking away from the mess they'd left me in, had worn off. Now I had to face the uncomfortable truth that I wasn't just being erased from their company. I was being erased from the very fabric of the technology I had built. The first sign came when I tried to access my old work files. I had kept a personal copy of the drone's code repositories, the very core of the PulseNet network, just in case something went wrong. I opened my laptop, clicked through a few folders, and noticed something immediately. My access had been revoked. The notification on my screen blinked. Access denied. User permissions are restricted. I stared at it for a moment, processing. They'd locked me out. Not just from the client databases, not just from the server systems I had left behind, but from my own work. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. It wasn't just the code that was missing. It was the acknowledgement, the citations and papers I had written, the technical design documents that featured my name as the lead engineer. Those were disappearing too. Over the next few days, I found technical papers that had once referenced my contributions being republished, without my name attached. It wasn't just erasure. It was a calculated, meticulous attempt to remove any trace of me from the company's legacy, as if I'd never been there. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I spent the next few weeks keeping a low profile, observing from the outside, gathering evidence. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them rewrite history. I documented everything I could. Emails, chats, project milestones. Everything that would prove that the success of the company wasn't just due to some faceless machine, but to the work I'd put in. Blood, sweat, and tears. One evening, I took a deep breath and dug into the company's internal server logs. It was risky, but I knew I had to do it. The company had always been behind a top-tier security system, but I had built it, so I knew its weak spots. Hours later, my laptop flickered with a file I'd unlocked. An internal memo between senior leadership that made my stomach drop. It was dated 3 weeks before I was fired. Memo: Transition plan for Mara Kelly's. Objective: transfer all credit for the flagship drones to the newly appointed chief engineer. Plan: redirect all praise and technical citations to Dr. Trevor Hayes, senior engineer, and replace Mara's name in all relevant materials. Goal: clean transition without raising red flags with investors or key clients. My hands shook as I read through it again, my throat tightening. They had already been planning this for months. From the day I started handing over major components of the technology to the new team, they'd been plotting my exit. It wasn't just a firing. It wasn't just about getting me out of the picture. This was about stealing my legacy, my work, my name, and handing it over to someone else. The worst part? They didn't even care to do it quietly. They knew what they were doing, and they had been counting on me not noticing. I slammed the laptop shut. This was no longer just about the company or its drones. This was personal. They wanted to rewrite the story, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next day, I met with my corporate lawyer friend, Rachel. She'd been the one to help me set up the legal claim embedded in the software, and now I needed her help to make sure I had every legal angle covered. As soon as she saw the memo, she didn't hesitate. "This is a clear breach of contract, Mara," she said, pushing the paper aside and leaning forward. "You've been erased, on paper at least. But we can fight this. You've got the evidence, you've got the code, and most importantly, you've got the clients." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope flicker in my chest. I had always been the quiet one. I had always let my work speak for itself. But now, I was going to speak for it. And I wasn't going to be erased without a fight. Rachel took out her phone and dialed a number. "I'm calling in a favor," she said, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk as she waited for someone to pick up. "I want to make sure those government contracts are held accountable too. If we bring them into this, it'll force their hand." Her voice hardened as she spoke into the phone. I listened closely, noting the names and contracts she mentioned, all connected to PulseNet's operations. "This is bigger than just you, Mara," she said, hanging up the phone. "We're going to make sure they don't get away with this. You'll get what's yours." The next week, everything started to shift. The phone calls came in, one after another, clients suspending contracts, key investors asking for clarification, and finally, a notice from the board. They were requesting an urgent meeting. It wasn't just a routine meeting. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment I had been waiting for. I didn't hesitate. I wasn't just going to fight for my place back in the company. I was going to force them to acknowledge what I had built. And then, once they had no choice but to accept me, I'd take back everything they tried to steal. I gathered the evidence, the code, the emails, the memos, all of it. But I wasn't just going to show up to the boardroom. I was going to walk in and own it. This was my technology, my legacy, and they were about to learn that nobody, no matter how big their company or how many millions they had in the bank, could erase someone who was willing to fight for what was rightfully theirs. It had been hours since the system failures started, hours since I had triggered the chain of events that brought the company to its knees. But as I walked into my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I'd been riding high on the adrenaline of my own success, the calculated risks I had taken paying off, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sit back and relax just yet. The CEO had probably already called in a team of IT specialists, a legal team, and an army of PR people to try to fix what I'd broken. But they were too late. The damage was done. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I glanced at it. Nothing. Then another message popped up. Another unknown number. This time, a voice came through. "Mara Kellis?" The voice was calm but had an edge to it. A professional coldness that sent a chill down my spine. "This is Mara," I said, my voice even, despite the thumping of my heart in my chest. "Good. I'd suggest you don't do anything drastic. You've caused quite a disruption. Bruce and his team are, well, let's just say they're in a panic right now." I could hear the amusement in his voice. But there was something else there too, something darker. "You think I care?" I snapped, gripping the phone tighter in my hand. "I've spent years building that company. They can't just toss me aside without a consequence. And trust me, I'm only getting started." There was a brief silence on the other end before the man spoke again, his tone now colder. "This isn't just about the company, Mara. This is much bigger than that. You've caught the attention of some powerful people." My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to remain composed. "What do you mean, powerful people?" The voice on the other end chuckled softly. "I think you know exactly what I mean. You've triggered something that extends beyond your little startup. PulseNet, the tech you built. It's not just about drones. It's about data, it's about control. And you've just walked into a much larger game." I didn't let the fear creep into my voice, though it was there, just beneath the surface. "You're threatening me." "We're not threatening you, Mara," he said, the calmness in his voice unsettling. "We're offering you an opportunity to walk away, leave the tech, leave the mess, and leave the game. We'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll be paid well for your silence." The offer hung in the air like a sticky web. I could almost feel him waiting for my response. "I don't make deals with people who think they can control me," I said, my voice steady. "You don't own me, and neither does Bruce. Not anymore. Not ever again." The line went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear the tension crackling between us. Then the man spoke, his voice tight now. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. You're too small, Mara. This is bigger than just one company. Bigger than you, bigger than Bruce. If you keep going down this road, there's no turning back. Understand?" "I've been on this road my whole life," I said, my lips curling into a smile. "And I'm not backing down now." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, the call ended with a soft click. I stood there, holding the phone to my ear for a moment longer, my breath slow and steady. There was a moment of silence in my apartment. I didn't know who I was dealing with yet, but I could feel the weight of their threat pressing in on me. This wasn't just about a corporate betrayal. This was about something far larger than I could have imagined. Just then, my doorbell rang. I walked to the door cautiously, my heart still pounding from the conversation. When I opened it, I was not expecting the two figures standing on the other side. Bruce and his right-hand man, Tom, were there. They didn't look like they had just come from a victory. In fact, they both looked rattled, their suits disheveled, their eyes wild with desperation. Bruce spoke first, his voice shaking slightly. "Mara, we need to talk. It's not what you think. "Save it," I said, cutting him off, stepping aside to let them in. "You want to talk? You talk on my terms now." Bruce and Tom stepped inside, looking like they had been through hell. Tom glanced at Bruce, who hesitated before sitting down on the edge of my couch, his body stiff with tension. "We're not here to argue," Bruce said, clearly frustrated. "I know what's going on, but you need to understand this isn't just about you. You've made a huge mistake. The things you've triggered. It's going to affect a lot of people." I raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? You're the one who fired me without warning, without any appreciation for the years I've spent building your company. And now you're here to beg me to fix it?" "We're not begging you," Tom spoke up, his voice hard. "But if you don't help us, things will spiral. The system you activated, it's bigger than just the drones. PulseNet, it's all connected. And you've just triggered an avalanche. I stared at him, my anger flaring. You think I don't know that? You think I don't realize how big the stakes are? You were the ones who erased me, Tom. You were the ones who thought you could pull the strings and make me disappear. Bruce's gaze flickered. We didn't want this to happen. We thought you would go quietly, but now I have the upper hand, I interrupted. And I'm going to use it. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. If you want your precious PulseNet system back up and running, you're going to have to give me what I want. A seat at the table, a fair share of the intellectual property, and full recognition of my authorship. Until then, consider this your new reality. Bruce and Tom exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke. Bruce's hands clenched into fists on his lap, but he didn't dare make a move. I won't let you erase me, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm not just a cog in your machine. I'm the creator of it, and you'll treat me as such, or I'll make sure you never see the light of day again. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating, but I wasn't backing down. I had come too far, and there was no turning back. The next few hours passed in a blur. Bruce and Tom had left my apartment with my ultimatum hanging in the air, the tension thick and palpable. But even as I shut the door behind them, I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't the end of the battle, it was just the beginning. I stood at the window, watching the city below, the cars moving in slow, steady streams. It was quiet in my apartment, but inside, my thoughts raced. PulseNet was a global network, but it wasn't just the company that would be affected by the chaos I'd set in motion. There were bigger forces at play. I could feel it in my gut. I was playing chess, but I wasn't the only one on the board. Just as I sat back down, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It had the same cold, professional tone as the man's voice from before, the one who had warned me to back off. My hands tightened around the phone as I read the message. You've made your point. Now walk away before it's too late. The stakes are much higher than you understand. I stared at the words for a moment, my pulse quickening. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was something far colder, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. This wasn't about just keeping the company from going under. This wasn't just about my code or my legacy anymore. This was about something far bigger. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was up against more than just a company and its executives. There was a vast network of investors, shadowy entities, people who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. I'd built something that threatened their control. The phone buzzed again, but this time the number was different. Another unknown contact. A cryptic text popped up. The people you've angered don't play by the same rules. They don't just want the tech. They want you gone. And they'll make sure of it. I tossed my phone onto the table, frustration boiling over. Who the hell were these people? I stood and paced the room. The more I thought about it, the more it clicked. The controlled failure of the PulseNet system, the sudden appearance of these mysterious figures, the cryptic messages. They weren't just trying to get me to back down. They were trying to intimidate me into submission. But I wasn't some pawn they could bully. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. I wasn't going to sit around and let them dictate the pace of the game. If I was going to fight this battle, I needed information, real, actionable information. I had to find out who was really behind this, and I wasn't going to do it from behind the safety of my laptop screen. Later that night, after making a few calls and tracking down a few leads, I found myself at a small cafe tucked in the corner of the city. The streets were quieter now, the rush of traffic fading into the background hum. It was here that I was supposed to meet someone who had been keeping an eye on the people pulling the strings behind PulseNet. I walked inside, scanning the dimly lit space. My contact was sitting at the back, a figure in a dark coat, their face obscured by the shadows. I approached slowly, sitting down across from them without saying a word. You're not being careful enough, the person said in a low voice, their eyes flicking over my shoulder, as if checking for eavesdroppers. They've noticed you. They know who you are. They've been watching. I leaned in, my voice steady. Who are they? Who's behind all this? The person looked around the room once more, then slid a small piece of paper across the table. I unfolded it. The name on it was familiar, PulseNet Investors Consortium, But it wasn't just the name that made my blood run cold. The address was one I'd seen before, only this time, it wasn't attached to a tech company. It was linked to a parent investment firm that was a shell, a corporation without an identity, and one with global influence. It had its fingers in multiple industries: technology, finance, energy. Their reach goes far beyond just PulseNet, my contact said, their voice quiet but firm. If you keep going down this path, you won't just be fighting Bruce and his team. You'll be going up against a network that's untouchable. I stared at the paper in my hand. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. PulseNet wasn't just about drones. It was part of something much bigger, an international operation that I had unknowingly stepped into the middle of. They think they can control the technology, I muttered. More to myself than to the person sitting across from me. They think they can control me. They do, the contact replied. And they won't hesitate to remove anyone who stands in their way. I sat back in my chair, the weight of their words sinking in. This wasn't just a fight over intellectual property. This was a battle for control. Control over technology, control over power, and control over the people who built it. I wasn't just fighting a corporate war. I was up against a global force that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. And if I didn't stop them now, they would take everything I had. My work, my legacy, my life. I looked at my contact, determination hardening in my chest. I won't back down. Not now, not ever. If they want a war, they'll get one. The contact's eyes flicked up to mine. Just know, Mara, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for something far bigger. I nodded slowly, my hand tightening around the paper they had given me. It was time to take the fight to them, whoever they were. The following morning, I found myself standing in front of a glass building that felt like a monument to corporate ambition. PulseNet's headquarters loomed over me, sleek and modern, its windows reflecting the overcast sky. Everything about it screamed power, untouchable power. I had spent the entire night preparing, gathering the evidence, the encrypted files with my code, the emails I had intercepted, the memos that proved the company had tried to erase me. I had also secured the legal support I needed. Rachel had been instrumental in lining up witnesses and digging through the financial backdoor deals that would expose the rot at the core of this operation. This wasn't just about a personal betrayal anymore. It was about taking down an empire built on lies. I checked my watch, took a deep breath, and entered the building. The boardroom was on the top floor, fitting considering that was where the decisions that shaped the world were made. I was led through sterile, white corridors, past walls adorned with sleek art and glass panels, until I was standing before a set of double doors. A security guard nodded at me, and one of Bruce's assistants ushered me inside. The boardroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. A long polished table sat in the center, around which the board members were already seated. Bruce was at the head, but it wasn't just him. The entire upper echelon of PulseNet was here. Executives from every department, legal advisors, and a few unfamiliar faces I could only assume were investors or tech specialists. As I walked in, all eyes turned toward me. The room was dead silent, and I could feel the weight of their gaze. Bruce looked like he was about to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped up to the front of the table and placed my laptop on the desk. Before we start, I said, my voice steady but firm, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't just a meeting. This is a reckoning. The murmurs in the room began, but I silenced them with a raised hand. I flipped open my laptop and clicked through a few files, pulling up evidence I had painstakingly gathered. Over the past few months, I've been locked out of my own work, I continued. I've been erased from the history of this company, removed from the very technology that I built, without any acknowledgement or gratitude. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The executives were starting to squirm, glancing at one another, unsure of what I was going to do next. But I had all the cards now. You're not here to discuss a new project, Bruce, I said, making eye contact with him. You're here because you know what's coming. You've been caught red-handed trying to steal my legacy. Bruce's face went pale, and I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. But he wasn't going to give up without a fight. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was ready. I have the proof, I said, pulling up the first encrypted file, an internal memo between the senior executives detailing the plan to transition my credit to a younger engineer, Trevor Hayes. You thought you could erase me from the history of this company. But I'm not going anywhere. I built this technology, and I will be compensated for it, legally and publicly. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. The executives were looking at each other, visibly rattled by the information I was presenting. You don't have to do this, Mara, Bruce finally said, his voice strained. We can work something out. You've made your point. But destroying the company won't help you. Destroying the company, I repeated, incredulous. I'm not here to destroy it. You've already done that yourself. The second you thought you could get rid of me, you set this all in motion. The system failures, the contracts being suspended, the investors backing out, this is all because of your arrogance. The investors in the room were shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Bruce and me. The pressure was mounting. It was clear they were losing their patience with him. I'm here for one thing only, I said, walking around the table and setting a small, thin folder in front of Bruce, a seat on the board, controlling rights over PulseNet, and 50% equity in the intellectual property that I built. You'll also be publicly acknowledging my contributions to the company. Without those terms, I'll make sure you never recover from this. I'll take this to every legal avenue available, including the investors and your clients. And when I'm finished, PulseNet won't just be out of business. It will be a cautionary tale for anyone who tries to erase someone who built something from scratch. The silence in the room was deafening. Bruce's face had gone from pale to ashen. He looked like he was trying to think of a way out, but he knew he was cornered. Are you seriously going to destroy everything I've built? He asked, his voice rising. The technology, the contracts. No, I said sharply. You've already destroyed it. I'm just making sure I get what I deserve. There was a long pause as the executives exchanged glances, some looking like they wanted to speak but were too afraid to. Finally, a woman in the back of the room, one of the investors, spoke up. I think we need to put this to a vote, she said, her voice firm. Mara has presented compelling evidence. And if what she says is true, we can't ignore it. We'll have to take her terms seriously. Bruce's eyes narrowed, but he knew there was no way out. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. We'll vote, but this is far from over. I smiled, a cool, measured smile. No, Bruce. This is just the beginning. As they called for a vote, I could see the shift in the room. The once loyal team of executives, the men and women who had seen me as just a cog in their machine, were now facing a reality they hadn't anticipated. They were being forced to choose between continuing to protect their CEO or acknowledging the woman who had single-handedly built the technology they relied on. The vote came down quickly, and the result was unanimous. They reinstated me as chief engineer with full control over the PulseNet platform and a seat on the board. Bruce stormed out of the room, defeated. But as I sat back, feeling the weight of the victory settle in, I knew the battle was far from over. The company was mine again, but the forces pulling the strings behind the scenes were still out there, and I had a feeling they weren't going to let this slide without a fight. It had been a few days since the boardroom showdown, and I could finally breathe. PulseNet was mine again, officially, legally. I had a seat at the table, a controlling share of the intellectual property, and the public acknowledgement I had been denied for so long. The first few hours were surreal. I'd walked out of the boardroom with the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. The sense of victory was intoxicating. The once smug CEO, Bruce, was now just a figurehead, and the rest of the board members had no choice but to comply with my terms. I had the power now. But the quiet didn't last long. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the latest contracts that were rolling in from clients who had suspended their agreements in the wake of PulseNet's collapse, when a ping on my computer caught my attention. I glanced at the notification, a simple message in my encrypted inbox, from an anonymous source. Check your back door. I froze. It wasn't the first time I'd received cryptic messages like this, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Whoever was sending these messages clearly had more than a passing interest in my every move. I stared at the message for a long moment, my pulse quickening. Check your back door could mean anything, or it could mean everything. I clicked the message open, scanning it for any clue that could give me insight into what was going on. There was no signature, no traceable source, just the warning. I'd gotten paranoid before, but I wasn't stupid. This wasn't a coincidence. This was someone watching me, waiting for me to slip. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered the possibilities. The back door. That could mean a number of things. Someone had compromised my security. Or worse, someone knew about my backup systems. The ones I'd embedded into PulseNet months ago. The failsafes I'd set in case I ever had to make an exit. I'd built them with the intention of keeping my technology secure. They weren't just a contingency in case of failure. They were a direct line to the one thing that could be used against me. And if someone had discovered them, they would know exactly how to destroy everything I'd worked for. I opened a few encrypted files in my system, quickly scanning for any vulnerabilities. It didn't take long before I found it. A sophisticated probe was running in the background, making its way into my systems through several different countries. The trail was hidden behind multiple layers of decoy servers, but I had the skills to trace it. This wasn't a simple hack. It was an operation. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. I started running deeper scans, pulling up IP addresses and tracing the connections. My heart was racing as I watched the data pour in. This was not just some random attack. It was orchestrated by a well-funded entity. There were no accidental digital footprints. Whoever was behind this had resources, serious resources. As I traced the network deeper, I uncovered offshore patent filings, attempts to re-register my designs under shell companies. The familiar jolt of realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was more than just someone trying to steal the technology I'd created. This was a full-blown intellectual property heist. They weren't just trying to erase me. They were trying to erase my work from the world entirely, from every possible system, from every potential contract. And they were trying to do it without anyone knowing. I sat back, my mind spinning. They've been planning this for months. They know everything about me, about the system I built, about the tech that drives PulseNet. I had thought I was a step ahead of them, but now it seemed like I was the one playing catch-up. It wasn't just the company I had to protect anymore. It was my legacy, my technology. And these people were willing to destroy it all to take control of something they couldn't own. I slammed my fist down on the desk. I wasn't going to let this happen. I quickly opened a secure connection to my backup systems, isolating the files that I knew were at risk. I had created a defensive protocol for situations like this, something I called Umbra. It was designed to lock down all systems and remove them from any online exposure. Once activated, it would make it nearly impossible for anyone to access my work without alerting me. I clicked the command, watching as the Umbra protocol initiated. The system hummed to life as it began to shut down all the remote connections, securing my technology in a digital vault. No one could touch it now, at least not without trying to break down the walls I'd just built around it. The notification came back on my screen, this time with a clearer message. It wasn't from the same source, but it was clear enough to recognize the threat. You're marked. This is just the beginning. You can run, but we'll find you. I leaned back in my chair, trying to suppress the surge of fear that threatened to rise in my chest. They had found my back door, yes, but now they'd learned they couldn't just walk through it. For the first time since I had left the company, I realized I wasn't just up against a corporate giant anymore. I was facing a shadowy, far-reaching network that was willing to do anything to claim what wasn't theirs. They had threatened me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with, and I wasn't backing down. The weight of the world seemed to lift off my shoulders as the last trace of the digital probe disappeared from my systems. Umbra had worked. My backup systems were secure, and the threat was neutralized, for now. But even as I sat there, staring at the clean screen in front of me, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just another battle, and the war was far from over. I hadn't realized just how isolated I had become until now. The moments of quiet reflection, where I could feel the pulse of my own thoughts, felt like a strange luxury. In the past, I had always relied on the company, the people I worked with, the clients who trusted me. Now I had nothing but my own knowledge, my own resolve, and a deep burning desire to make sure this war was won. I'd already decided that I wasn't going to fight this battle in the shadows anymore. No more hidden threats or whispered warnings in the dark. If these people wanted to go to war, then I would make sure the world knew exactly who was fighting for what. It was time to turn the tables. I reached out to Rachel. She had been invaluable during the legal wrangling that had already taken place. But now I needed her to help me get the truth out into the open. She answered on the second ring. Rachel, I said, my voice steady but full of purpose. I'm done playing their game. I want to go public. She was silent for a moment, letting the words settle. Public? She asked carefully. You know what that means, right? Once this goes public, it's going to get messy. This isn't just about corporate takeovers anymore. It's about exposure. There are people who will do anything to make sure you shut up. I'm not afraid, I replied, my mind already racing through the logistics. I have everything I need. The patents, the internal memos, the system logs. I've got the proof that they tried to steal everything from me. And now I'm going to make sure the investors and the public know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. Rachel paused again, her voice quiet but resolute. All right, let's do it. It wasn't long before I had a plan in place. Rachel contacted the appropriate regulatory agencies and industry watchdogs, setting up the groundwork for an official investigation. But that was just one part of it. The other part, the part that would make sure I had the world's attention, was much more public. I sat at my desk, my hands steady, as I typed the message that would set everything in motion. It was a risk, a huge one, but it was the only way I could make sure the people who had tried to erase me knew I wasn't going anywhere. I sent out the first round of emails to major media outlets, tech journalists, investigative reporters, anyone who had the credibility to make waves. I included everything I had, the documents, the screenshots, the encrypted files. I made sure they had everything they needed to investigate. As I sat back in my chair, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. There was no going back. The moment I hit send, the story was out of my hands. It would go where it would go, and I had to trust that the truth would do its work. But I wasn't going to leave it to them alone. I made sure to take to social media, posting a carefully worded message that didn't just hint at the corruption within PulseNet. It shouted it from the rooftops. They tried to erase me, but they can't erase the truth. They tried to steal what I built, but the world deserves to know what's really going on. PulseNet is a giant, but even giants fall when the truth is exposed. Stay tuned. I didn't give away all the details. I wasn't stupid. But it was enough to get the ball rolling. Enough to let the world know that I wasn't just some disgruntled former employee. I was a whistleblower, a fighter, and I had something that could bring them down. It didn't take long for the media to catch fire. The first story broke within hours, a short piece on one of the leading tech blogs, followed by another report on a financial news outlet. The headline read, PulseNet and its CEO accused of intellectual property theft by former chief engineer. The articles were vague at first, but they were picking up steam. As the stories spread, the floodgates opened. Reporters were reaching out to Rachel, asking for more information. Clients started to suspend their contracts again. Investors pulled out, and PulseNet's stock dropped faster than anyone had anticipated. Bruce tried to control the narrative with a series of desperate press releases, but the damage had already been done. Soon after, the legal battle began. The company was forced to hold a public press conference, but Bruce couldn't even stand tall. The journalists tore into him, asking hard questions that he couldn't answer. He stammered, his confidence shattered by the onslaught of exposure. But the best part, PulseNet's investors were panicking. They'd been asleep at the wheel, letting Bruce make decisions without oversight. Now they were scrambling to put out the fire, but they didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, I received a call from one of the investors, someone who had been keeping an eye on the situation from the inside. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Is this Mara Kellis? The voice on the other end asked, sounding cautious. It is, I said, not bothering to hide my amusement. I'm with one of the top investment firms backing PulseNet. We've been reviewing the information you sent, and I wanted to speak with you. We're not happy with how this has been handled. I smiled. It wasn't the first call I'd received like this, but it was the first one from someone who sounded like they were actually considering the truth. You know, I'm glad you called, I said, because I think it's time to make sure we talk terms. But don't mistake me. This isn't about money anymore. This is about taking back what's mine. And I think it's time you all recognize that. The silence on the other end lasted a moment too long, and then he spoke again, this time with a much softer tone. We'll be in touch. I hung up, my heart beating steady. The storm was just getting started, and I was ready for whatever came next. The dust had barely settled before the real chaos began. The media storm, which had seemed like a fire in the beginning, was now a full-blown wildfire, with every news outlet running headlines about the whistleblower engineer who had taken down one of the largest autonomous drone companies in the world. PulseNet was reeling, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to keep my head above water. But as the headlines screamed my name, as the legal team from the company scrambled to mitigate the damage, there was still a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. The corporate battle was won, but I knew the war wasn't over. There was something bigger at play now, something darker. I couldn't escape the message I had received from the anonymous caller earlier. The warning to walk away before it's too late. It haunted me. Whoever had been behind the attempt to erase me didn't just want the technology, they wanted me gone. And they weren't just going to let me walk away. Not after all this. Even as I sat in my office, catching up on the flood of emails from clients who were now coming back to PulseNet, I kept feeling like I was being watched. My phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues, former clients, even strangers who had followed the story. For a moment, it almost felt like everything I had worked for was falling into place. But that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. I knew I wasn't safe. That evening, as I sat in my apartment, running through the latest batch of encrypted contracts, something strange happened. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from an untraceable number. Check your back door. My heart skipped a beat. I had just closed down all systems to prevent further cyber breaches. How could they have gotten through? They couldn't. There was no way. I had locked it all down. Umbra was active. My files were secure, or so I thought. I stood up abruptly, walking toward my laptop. My mind raced as I opened the security software. I ran a deep scan, checking the firewall, my personal encryption protocols. Everything seemed secure, but the warning kept gnawing at me. Then, the dreaded ping. A message flashed across my screen. Nice try. You can't protect yourself forever. The panic I had felt before surged back, stronger this time. I hadn't even activated the firewall for an external attack like this. Whoever was behind it had known exactly what they were doing. They had breached my system. No, not just my system, the Umbra protocol. They had found a way around it. Suddenly, it clicked. I wasn't just fighting for my technology anymore. I was fighting for my life. I quickly opened the control panel, isolating my work files, but the damage was already done. My screen flickered. The familiar hum of my system went dead for a split second. Then came the knock at the door. I froze. It wasn't just my laptop that had been hacked. I was being watched. My head spun as I glanced around, realizing that the warning I'd ignored earlier had been real. The game wasn't over. I was still in their sights. The knock came again, louder this time. I stood there, paralyzed for a moment. Then I grabbed my phone, quickly tapping a few commands. I activated my emergency alert system, setting a temporary lock on the front door and sending an encrypted alert to Rachel. Before I could even process what was happening, the door opened. It wasn't forceful. It was more like it was pushed open, gently, just enough for someone to slip inside. I didn't have time to react. A figure stood in the doorway, their silhouette barely visible in the dim light. I could barely make out their face, but the air in the room felt colder as I realized they weren't here for a casual conversation. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the dread crawling up my spine. "I'm someone who doesn't want to see you destroy everything we've worked for," the voice replied, calm and unnervingly composed. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized the voice. It was the same one from the anonymous messages, the same voice that had warned me to walk away. "Is this what it's come to?" I asked, standing up. "You think you can intimidate me into silence?" The figure stepped forward into the light. It was a man in a dark suit, but his face remained covered, hidden beneath a black mask, just enough to make his presence terrifyingly impersonal. He didn't answer me. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small, sleek device. He tapped a few buttons, and the room went dark. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. "This is your last warning. We don't want to see you again." My heart pounded in my chest. I barely had time to react before the figure moved, fast and purposeful, toward my laptop, where the files I'd worked so hard to protect were stored. "No!" I shouted, rushing toward him, but I was too late. He had already unplugged the device and connected it to my computer. The screens flickered, the noise of my system crashing drowning out everything else. My stomach dropped as I realized what he was doing. He was copying everything. "Stop!" I yelled, lunging for the device, but the man was faster. He pressed a button, and the copy process stopped instantly. He had locked it all down, my code, my files, everything. He turned to face me, his eyes glinting coldly behind the mask. "You still don't get it, do you? You've been marked. There's no going back now." And with that, he walked out, leaving me standing there, the room empty except for the deafening silence of my crashing system. I stood there, frozen in place for a long time. My heart raced, my mind in a fog. The man had stolen my files, but that wasn't the worst of it. He had a message. "You've been marked." I scrambled for my phone, quickly texting Rachel. She had to know. She had to help. But there was no time to wait. I had to move quickly. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't just about the technology. This was bigger. Someone wanted to control me, and I wasn't going to let them. I grabbed my coat, heading out the door into the cold night, knowing that the battle I had fought wasn't over. It was just beginning.